Alrighty, hello everybody. It's not quite December, it's the last few days in November. I honestly don't know what the date is today when I'm recording this, but I know it's not December yet. But we're getting there, we're getting towards the end of the year, and I thought I'd do another update video. This one is going to feel very similar to the ones that have come before, covering the same old topics. But hopefully next year we'll actually start to see some. I got to see some progress in one thing or another next year, so there will be progress somewhere. I just don't know where it is. Things are going as well as they can do, streaming wise, which has been nice. Still playing a lot of Overwatch. Playing some Black Ops 7 now, which is fun. Not the best Call of Duty, I would say, but you know, multiplayer feels very multiplayer. And yeah, seems okay. Not great, but okay. Really, I want to talk about the other side of things on this update video. So if all you're interested in is in the streaming side, thank you for helping. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining. It's very much appreciated. But I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into kind of where I am and what is likely to happen going forward. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. I would do an intro like video right now, but I don't have one, so I'm not going to. It's been an interesting year, not interesting in the good way, interesting in that I don't want to say what it's really been, so I'll use the word interesting. And that is definitely going to go forward into next year. There's just no way that that can be avoided. This shed, which I'm in now, I'm only allowed to be in here until the end of March. And I have no plans or ideas of where I will be going after that date, which is scary as hell, right? So I was hoping to be a lot more further forward in projects by the end of this year, so I could then kind of concentrate going into next year on, do I think it's going to work, all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, health, family, mice invading my shed have all put me behind yet again. However, there are some positive things going on in my life as well, which is good. Still waiting to hear back on the kind of final form that those things are going to take, and those will impact very heavily how next year looks. I'll be honest, 100%. I want to keep on doing the streaming and I want to keep on making the projects. I don't know how realistic that is. It's been looking less and less realistic every year that I kind of miss my targets. And I'm kind of now at the stage where I really, really want to put in a big monumental effort. But the big part of that effort is, so I was saying on stream the other day, you know, one of the things I don't really understand about me is that I will put in the work for anybody else. No problem. Don't need to be paid for it. You know, just if it's helping them, I do not mind putting in the work and the effort. When it comes to doing it for me, I tend to be the exact opposite. And I don't know why. So, you know, I'm trying to get to a point where I can put in that effort, and I will put in that effort, and in some way there are kind of milestones that can be tracked to kind of keep me honest. But I don't know how that system would work, and I don't know how that system can work to motivate me to keep things going. I don't know at this moment in time. But I do want to keep on doing it. I want to put out more content. I want to put out different content. You know, I enjoy the streaming. The 4 hours of stream every day is a lot of fun. I do have some ideas of things I want to do there on the streaming side. but I don't know if I should be doing them as an extra or as a replacement to the streaming side. So at the moment, Monday to Friday and normally on Sundays, depending on who is around, I stream for 4 hours a day. And we play games mostly, and I moan a lot, and that's kind of what we do. And that's fine, as long as there are games to play. Overwatch 2 has become my fallback. I will admit I am enjoying Overwatch 2 at the moment. I do honestly believe Blizzard are doing well with Overwatch 2. That will stop at some point. Blizzard will make a misstep, and it will go downhill again. But we are where we are. There have been a huge number of good single-player games come out, but they've all been too bloody expensive, so I haven't brought any yet. So I'm kind of hoping, maybe in the Christmas sale, I can stock up on a few games to kind of get us through the first few months of 2026. If I decide that's what I'm going to do. And I think this is kind of the important part, the important thing I've been saying is that I kind of have to decide by the end of December, am I going to give this another 2 years and try and build up and scrape how I've been living for the past however long we've been doing this? Or is it time to draw a line under it, say, I gave it a go. It didn't work. I have to do something else. The part of doing something else is there's nothing else I particularly want to do, which, is probably true for most people who are in their jobs, right? Not very few people, I believe, are doing what they want to do. And yeah, trying to making that decision, and then kind of how it all kind of dovetails or dominoes from there, right? It's very easy to say I've made that decision. The job market is awful at the moment. So even if I do want to go and find a job, getting a job could be incredibly difficult. With the projects, I can put in the work to do the projects, but trying to find an audience and getting an audience to find them is incredibly difficult. Trying to find somewhere where I'll be able to set up all my computers, PCs, and live is going to be insanely difficult. So there's a lot coming up that I need to work my way through and decide how I want to work my way through it. There are options, not many, and honestly, by probably the end of the second week of December, I will know really what my options are, so I can start to make more final decisions. But I kind of wanted to just state where I am right now and kind of what I'm hoping will happen next year. So I do have an old garage and an old shed that I can attempt to turn into a studio, basically. A little bit fancy a word for what I would be trying to do to it, but it does the job. Finding the money to do that and the time to do that is going to be difficult, but it does then mean I can move from here, which I have to do, into there and kind of carry on going. It also means that there will be a lot more space in that studio if I do want to branch out into other things, which I definitely do. I just don't know what it is I want to do at this stage. And I've toyed around with various ideas at different times, and I honestly don't believe a lack of space is what has been holding me back on some of these. Now, there are things I could definitely do with more space. I toyed around a long time ago with, recording board game content. The lack of space has definitely stopped me doing that. I don't really have a table at the moment that I can play board games on and easily record them at the same time. Yes, I could probably clear this table to play board games on, but it has to be stuck up against the wall, which makes it very difficult to then record around it. Because one of the things you want to be able to do with board games is kind of move the camera around the table where you need it to be, get the angles that you need. And that takes up a lot of room. And I don't think at this stage that's kind of where I even want to concentrate my efforts on. I could have a lot of fun with that. Obviously, you're buying board games, you got to unbox them. So there's content for you. You can play through them. From my point of view, it means I could, if the money starts coming in, I can start looking at, buying things to do overhead cameras, microphones, all the kind of stuff I enjoy wasting money on. But I honestly don't think that's where I want to concentrate my efforts on, even though that would be a good time. I really have this urge to be creative again. And I think this is one of the things that I'm just not doing at the moment. We got the book out, Duplicate Prints, available now on Amazon. I don't know if it'll be on Kobo yet. There seems to be some issues with the Kobo thing, but it's definitely on Amazon. The Duplicate Prints by P.O. Cake. Go check it out. That's the only plug I'm going to do for that. Bye-bye, Train of Thought. Bye-bye. Yeah, I want to concentrate more on the creative side and kind of put a lot more effort into that. And it's kind of deciding how that's going to work and where the effort is going to go. And I really, really want to bring Cakeyverse back. Not just as a weird joke, because everything was becoming a metaverse or a multiverse at the time when, the Cakeyverse came up as a joke, but as a solid idea and a solid foundation to launch everything else off, and to try and make it a interesting storytelling platform. This all sounds so grandiose, what it is I'm trying to achieve, with a lot of interactive elements. So what do I mean by that? That is a very good question, mate, and I'm not 100% sure. But I can kind of talk about the bits that I am sure about at the moment. So I may have to pause because there's definitely someone driving into my drive. Okay, I am back, and I took the time, made myself a nice cup of coffee. Now, where were we? Talking about the platform, Cakeyverse as a platform, and what that could mean to kind of everything going forward. So one of the first things I'm working on is this idea of Cakeyverse Adventures, which will be a hopefully weekly production, probably in segments of 6 to 10 episodes, followed by a little bit of a break, and then into kind of the next segment, or season, or however you want to describe it. And part of that would be a main story, bringing back the Otherworld news. And I kind of want to do an asterisk here because depending on how I really want to move forward, the Otherworld news could become a much bigger thing in and of itself. But this is where I am now with Cakeyverse Adventures. This is kind of a main story segment, the Otherworld news, and then a kind of second section of the main story segment. For the initial season, which I'm going with season 0, it's a little bit difficult because I'm setting up the Cakeyverse. We're kind of we're taking people from one made up place and transporting them into another made up place, which is the Cakeyverse. And that makes it difficult for a number of reasons, especially with the Otherworld news, because there'll be nothing to report on in terms of the Cakeyverse, because for that initial run, the Cakeyverse doesn't exist. So, but that's kind of that's an internal thing, right? That's just a kind of a thing that I can work around. And where was I? So the first story is called The Last Wizards. And they, like I said, they come from one made-up place and end up in the Cakeyverse, and that's kind of how I'm introducing, taking a bunch of characters and then kind of introducing you through them to what the Cakeyverse will be, and how that can grow and all that kind of stuff. And then for the initial season at least, for however many episodes it runs to, I haven't quite worked out. I don't know how long I want the individual segments to be. I don't know how long I want an individual episode of Kekiverse Adventures to be. There's still kind of a lot of things up in the air. So I don't know how many episodes it would take for that story to be told. And that is, that would be a fairly long story told over the first however many batch of Kekiverse Adventures that we do. Part of me is already unsure if that's how I want the Kekiverse Adventures to work. I think I do. I think if I'm going to carry on with this idea, and again, asterisks, because my mind is starting to go a slightly different way, but not in a negative way. I don't think. I think it's kind of in a this could work better, maybe, but we'll see. Stay with me, or don't. And then, like I say, there would be 2 installments of the story every week, every episode of Kekiverse Adventures. How wrapped up each story would be, like I say, this is a movie-long story, but broken down into episodes, and then further broken down into 2 parts per episode. I would imagine that the 2 parts per episode, the first part would probably not have a wrap up. We might try and do soap opera cliffhangers, so it kind of wraps up on a cliffhanger on the kind of ad break section 1. This is the other part of Kekiverse Adventures, is there will be ad breaks. Now the ad breaks will be made up and should all be based in Kekiverse lore as well, which again becomes quite difficult for the first ones because, as I've said before, there is no Kekiverse. But then, a lot of the ads are kind of meant to key in. I don't think that's the word I want to use, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Kind of play into what is happening in the story and also what is being reported on with the Otherworld news. I kind of want it to feel like one big whole, right? Giggity. And I think that works. And then whether with the kind of story section 2 per episode, one of the main things I'm arguing with myself with is, do I want to make them feel like episodes, right? Or chapters? Should it be that there is a reasonable, I mean, I wouldn't end mid-sentence, just like that. But, does there have to be a clear, this is the end of this week, we're going to go into next week. It's going to be a direct continuation. So it's kind of thinking about how rounded I want each episode to feel going forward. But then on top of that, I'm also toying with the idea is, with stories like The Last Wizard and the kind of other stories I would want to tell as Kekiverse Adventures, would they be better as an episodic thing, again around 20 minutes, but completely on their own, probably with ad breaks? I do want to keep the idea of ad breaks and then spin the Otherworld news into a much bigger thing, because the Otherworld news would then report on everything we do for the Kekiverse, possibly on stream. And this is kind of where my thought process is going at the moment. So I'd already, with the Otherworld news, come up with this idea that there would be it's a news program, so they have to report on sports. That means I need to have sports to report on in the Kekiverse. And we were coming up with a made up sport that I could play with teams, leagues, all that kind of stuff. We'd have to make heroes and all that kind of stuff. But we could then play the rounds of that sport on stream, right? So, I then believe that's good, unique content to stream. I don't have to rely on a game coming out or playing Overwatch 2. Not, it's not going anywhere. I'm not saying we're going to completely replace streaming with Kekiverse stuff. But I think I would like at least twice a week, maybe, to be doing something for the Kekiverse while I'm streaming it as well. And the other side of that is, I'd like there to be things going on Discord and Patreon, which are also impacting the Kekiverse as a whole. So if we imagine the Cakeverse is a massive, massive world, right, where often I will be putting spotlights on very small sections of it through the story sections, whether that's through a Cakeverse Adventures story or we're spinning that off into its own thing. Well, that probably would become Cakeverse Adventures, but then the Otherworld News would not be part of it. But, you know, we're shining these spotlights on these tiny sections, which I would probably write completely privately by myself. And then the Otherworld News is trying to capture the greater impacts, which we could be doing on stream, right? And Discord and Patreon. Like, if there's going to be different kingdoms, there's going to have to be political work going on in the background. There could be wars going on. You know, the idea of doing a stream because, you know, two factions have got to a situation where they have declared a war and kind of going through the battles sounds kind of appealing to me. And then kind of covering those as a news reporter afterwards for the Otherworld News as a kind of catch-up mechanism also appeals to me as well. I like that idea. And, you know, I very much like the idea of using Tailspire for most of these, even though I'm working most of the stuff up in Foundry, just because that's more simple. The idea of kind of virtual tabletop where I can kind of record these and stream these nicely and possibly capture screenshots that we would need for the report going forward, or, you know, or clips, that kind of thing, all being produced and then kind of reused, appeals to me. I like that idea, and I like kind of slowly breaking into the idea that there would be more original content on the stream side of things, right? And if people like that stuff, and if my brain can keep up with that kind of stuff, you know, kind of. So here's what I've said here's what I'm thinking many times. And what I'm thinking has always changed every time I've said it. So that's probably not good. But anyway, with the sport thing, you know, I'm kind of hoping that you would sit down and do a session of the sport. Even better if I can convince other people to play the different teams, you know, because I just think that would be more fun as stream, and then, you know, to report on as well. And it means that the characters that are being created by the other people are also kind of shining through. It just gives a little bit of a different, little bit of flavor, right? You know, whereas the team that I create, which, you know, let's face it, it's probably going to be a necromancy team. But anyway, I would hope that a session of that would take between 30 to 40 minutes, right? So if I was doing one of those, let's say every Tuesday, we start the stream Tuesday doing a sport. We haven't come up with the sport yet, so we'll have to do that as well. But, you know, that's a good, let's say an hour. So let's say that takes the first hour, because I may want to stop, I may want to take pictures, all that kind of stuff. But then that's like an hour on Tuesday. And then if I could do the same kind of thing on a Thursday, maybe, where we're possibly doing something bigger, you know, where we are forcing, you know, I also kind of like the idea of doing a story through this kind of idea. You know, let's say, on top of my head, we follow some kind of thief, right? And what we could do is we could play out his attempts at thievery on stream, making it a bit more board gamey with some dice rolls, but, you know, their fate in the hands of the people who are watching stream at the time, and kind of playing through it. And then obviously based on what happens, I will then go away and make a much better cohesive story. But, you know, it's all kind of happened on dice rolls, which again, I find, you know, a little bit of fun, and could be something else that the Otherworld News needs to report on. And then as for the bigger things, you know, like the politics, you know, what are the gods doing? Are they angry? That kind of thing. Being able to do that through Patreon, Discord, kind of getting all of that stuff separately and in private, so, you know, people don't realize all of what's going on, and then kind of reporting on that afterwards through this Otherworld News idea. Again, it's an idea I like, and it's an idea I think that could work quite well. Especially when I think of it as a kind of, yes, I do want this to be interactive. I do want to seek input from either individuals, Patreons, polls, whatever it's going to end up being, I do want to seek input as much as possible, right? I may try and lay out a fantastic story from start to finish, right? And then I want people to get in my way, throw obstacles in my way, go down different paths, right? If you've ever, DM'd a D&D campaign, you kind of know what I'm talking about. You've got your plans, but you've got to be ready to roll with it. And I think trying to do something like that, as simple as possible, right? Tailspire for the stream side gives us something nice to look at and can handle the dice rolls and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what the Twitch integration is like with Tailspire. If there is any, I'd have to look into that because I think that would be nice. But, that kind of gives us a start. And we're going to start with the sport. And even though I've said I may split Cakeverse Adventures and the Otherworld News apart, to begin with, we will definitely put them together. And we will definitely do a shorter story with The Last Wizards. And I will try and do whatever I can to keep the Otherworld News section of those working. Because again, the Otherworld News is also going to have to be ripped from their fantasy into the Cakeverse, right? So even though The Last Wizards may be our main introduction, the Otherworld News team building everything is also being ripped from where it is and ends up in the Cakeverse, right? So there is stuff to report on, even if it's just them reporting on what the fuck is happening to them for that initial kind of run, which again kind of works. And then I have a few ideas for ads that could kind of go into that. On the ad front, like I said, I want them all to be Cakeverse based. And one of the things I'm toying with is the idea of getting Patreon supporters to come up with products, people, and services who would need ads done for them, right? I don't think I want to go down there having them write the ads themselves, but I do kind of like the idea that they can kind of come up with a product, an idea, and kind of like a theme for an ad, and then I come up with something for them and we put it into the Cakeverse Adventures, right? Again, I think that could be a lot of fun. And kind of fun and interactivity is kind of what I want the Cakeverse to be, right? And then outside of the Cakeverse, I do also want to be writing other books as well, right? The Duplicate Prince, I'm 75% of the way through the sequel to that, which, the Duplicate Prince probably should have just been part one of a much longer book. It wasn't. And that kind of really wraps up the story of Annabelle the Witch, at least for that stage. And then I can decide if I want to bring Annabelle over to Cakeverse as well. I probably will. I like the character of Annabelle and some of the other characters who really come up in the second book. Like the sheriff, Big Bad Wolf, I really like. And I also kind of like Red Riding Hood, what I've done to her in that one as well. So, maybe bringing some of that into the Cakeverse is something we can do afterwards. And then once that's done, working on the Necromancer's Journey, which would not be Cakeverse based. That would be something I'd work on in private and then kind of put out as a book at the end. But everything that is kind of more Cakeverse, be more open and interactive and kind of done and produced out in the open as much as possible without giving it all away. So that's kind of where I am. I want to be able to do more original content on stream. Not fully. Definitely not fully. I don't want to do everyday original content at this moment in time. I'm not saying that my mind won't change, right? And maybe we get really into the producing the Cakeverse content on stream, and that is what we end up doing with the occasional break for a game. That's not where I want to go at this moment in time, though. Kind of, it's mostly going to be game playing with some Cakeverse production stuff going on, right? If we can then do smaller things, which can kind of happen, because obviously with the sports ball and the kind of battles we're doing, those would take the attention of stream. If there are things we can do in the background that also impact the Cakeverse while I'm streaming, You know, I have the idea of trying to bring back boss fights, which people used to like, but somehow have that impacting something that happens in the Kekiverse, right? Just little things I can have going on stream that, you know, go fade into the background, but are there if chat want to interact with them on those times where I'm not in your face Kekiverse stuff on stream. But yeah, it'll be coming up with those ideas and then coming up with how I actually make those ideas work, right? But the main thing at the moment is kind of pull myself back to the basics and try and get episode 0 of Kekiverse Adventures out. And again, deciding on how I want that to look. I would love to very crudely animate all of this, right? And I may try to do some kind of crude Tailspire based camera switching as the people are talking kind of thing for the story. The Otherworld news, I think I'm definitely going to do in Tailspire for now. I'm going to build out a newsroom and probably do that for those. But the kind of the Last Wizards. But again, I do want this. I don't want too many visual jokes. I do want this to work audio wise as well, because it's in its most basic form, in the kind of the form I can guarantee the most is audio podcast, right? I do want to put it up on YouTube as well, and that's kind of where having these video elements to it works, right? But I always want to make sure that the audio track works on its own. If we go more down the animation side, putting in some subtle visual gags, I don't mind. But, you know, that's for further down the road. So I think what I'm going to concentrate on is getting out a audio version of the first one. Get feedback, and then take it from there. Also, building up the sport. I don't need the sport to exist for these early episodes because, again, the Kekiverse doesn't exist, so there can be no sports team in the Kekiverse world, right? Any sport that's reported on in those initial ones is going to be very short and made up, and people stuck in an office as they're hurtling through space to wherever the hell they end up, which ends up being called the Kekiverse. So I don't need it then, but we can work on that. And maybe Tuesdays for an hour or two, we will kind of work on that kind of sports ball game until we get a good idea going, you know, good set of rules, good gameplay. And then that's kind of how I can kind of start introducing the idea of we're going to do some Kekiverse content on stream going forward. And then, yeah. I think I've mainly just been talking to myself on this one to try and sort out where my mind is and kind of where I want to go. And kind of asking myself, and this is the main question, kind of asking myself is, do I want to do this? And the answer is a definite yes. It's just getting around to actually fucking doing it. But yeah, as I've talked about it, I've got more and more excited about trying to do it, which I take as a very good sign. So, but yeah, with the initial part of this, before I cut and got myself a cup of coffee, this is going to be a fairly long update video. I'll try and shorten it a little bit, but I'm not going to do a whole lot of editing because honestly, editing on Windows PC with DaVinci Resolve isn't a lot of fun. One of the other reasons I'm thinking about not doing a lot of animations, there is no way that can be true. There's no way that could be true. And how the hell are you even connected? All right, I'm going to have to go and check on that. Anyway, yes, that's where I am. I would appreciate any feedback. I'm going to try and put a lot of effort into this going into December. Hopefully something else won't fall apart, which kind of drags me away from it again. And if it does, maybe I'm just going to have to sit here with a kind of this is fine mentality and just crack on with it. So yeah, that's where I am. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all when I see you all. Bye for now.